Speaker Gingrich, some people on this stage have run big companies, some have turned around companies, some manage payrolls. What makes you more qualified than anyone else on this stage to create jobs and grow the economy?
You know, you've been asking about divided government. This coming Saturday is the 30th anniversary of Ronald Reagan signing the Kemp-Roth tax cut, which was done with divided government. I was part of that effort in the House where the Democrats were in control. He did it by going to the American people with clarity, creating a sense of urgency, bringing pressure to bear on the Democratic congressmen, and building a bipartisan majority. That tax cut led to 7 years of growth, which in our current economy would be the equivalent of adding 25 million jobs, $4.4 trillion a year to the economy, and $800 billion in new federal revenue. A decade later, as Speaker of the House, we had divided government. We negotiated with Bill Clinton. He vetoed welfare reform twice. We passed it 3 times. He signed it the 3rd time. Largest entitlement reform of your lifetime. We passed the first tax cut in 16 years. The largest capital gains tax cut in history. Unemployment dropped to 4.2%. How would the country feel today at 4.2% unemployment? That's my credential.
How do you respond to people who say that your campaign has been a mess so far?
Well, let me say, first of all, Chris, that I took seriously Brett's injunction to put aside the talking points. And I wish you would put aside the gotcha questions. Like Ronald Reagan, who had 13 senior staff resign the morning of the New Hampshire primary, and whose new campaign manager laid off 100 people because he had no money, because the consultants had spent it. Like John McCain, who had to go and run an inexpensive campaign because the consultants spent it. I intend to run on ideas. Congress should come back Monday. They should repeal the Dodd-Frank bill. They should repeal Sarbanes-Oxley. They should repeal Obamacare. They should institute Lean Six Sigma across the entire federal government. A hard idea for Washington reporters to cover, but an important idea because it's the key to American manufacturing success. I'd love to see the rest of tonight's debate asking us about what we would do to lead an America whose president has failed to lead, instead of playing Mickey Mouse games.
Speaker Gingrich, if you think questions about your records are Mickey Mouse, I'm sorry. I think those are questions that a lot of people want to hear answers to, and you're responsible for your records. So.
Well, if I get a rebuttal,
Pardon?
I think that there's too much attention paid by the press corps about the campaign minutia and not enough paid by the press corps to the basic ideas that distinguish us from Barack Obama.
Speaker Gingrich, you recently told Univision that you're looking at the idea of having citizen boards choose which illegal immigrants can stay in the country and which would have to go. Who decides the memberships of these boards, and how would they work?
I think it's very important to go back and look at how the Selective Service Commission worked in World War II, because it was local, practical decision-making, and people generally thought it was fair and it was reasonable. But let me go back to your earlier question to Herman. I thought the President's speech in El Paso, where he talked about moats and alligators, was the perfect symbol of his failure as a leader. He failed to get any immigration reform through when he controlled the Senate and he controlled the House. He could ram through Obamacare, but he couldn't deal with immigration. Now he has Republicans in the House in charge, and he descends to a level of attack, which I think is very sad for a President of the United States on an issue like this. We ought to control the border. And I agree with Governor Huntsman, we can control the border. I'd be prepared to take as many people from Homeland Security's bureaucracy in Washington and move them to Texas, Arizona, and New Mexico as are needed to control the border. We should have English as the official language of government. And we should have a method for distinguishing between people who've lived here a long time and people who've come very recently.
When you raise your hand, if you feel so strongly about not raising taxes, you'd walk away on the 10-to-1 deal. Mr. Speaker, why are you shaking your head?
I think this...
Is that not an important question?
I think this super committee is about as dumb an idea as Washington has come up with in my lifetime. I mean, if you will for a second, bro, I mean, I used to run the House of Representatives. I have some general notion of these things. The idea that 523 senators and congressmen are going to sit around for 4 months while 12 brilliant people, mostly picked for political reasons, are going to sit in some room and brilliantly come up with $1 trillion, or force us to choose between gutting our military and accepting a tax increase is irrational. They're going to walk in just before Thanksgiving and say, all right, we can shoot you in the head or cut off your right leg. Which do you prefer? What they ought to do is scrap the committee right now, recognize it's a dumb idea, go back to regular legislative business, assign every subcommittee the task of finding savings, do it out in the open through regular legislative order, and get rid of this secret, phony business.
Okay. Speaker Gingrich, any thoughts on either of those?
Well, I want to echo what Congressman Buckner just said. You know, Mayor Giuliani has every right to run, and I think he's talking to some folks about it. Governor Perry has a great record of job creation in Texas, and I think is a very formidable person. Governor Palin has a nationwide audience. And I know it's a shock sometimes to political folks, but the first delegates are chosen in January. People have lots of time to come and play. Now, they're missing this great opportunity to be with you guys and have all the fun that we're having here tonight. But, you know, that's their prerogative, and I look forward to anybody who wants to running for office. That's what America's all about.
I'll split. You said, quote, exercise a no-fly zone this evening, communicate to the Libyan military that Gaddafi was gone, and that the sooner they switched sides, the more likely they were to survive. After the president launched military action a few days later, you said, quote, I would not have intervened. I think there were a lot of other ways to affect Gaddafi. Are you now certain about the way forward in Libya and where it stands now?
Let me suggest this is a good example of a gotcha question.
No, it's not. These are things you said.
No, go back previous to Greta Van Susteren 2 weeks earlier when I said what we should do is go in covertly, use Egyptian and other allies, not use American forces.
But, Mr. Speaker, you said these two things.
That's right. I said that thing specifically after the president that day announced gloriously to the world as President of the United States that Gaddafi has to go. And I said, if the President of the United States is serious about Gaddafi going, this is what we should do. The following interview came after the same president said, well, I didn't really mean go meant go. I meant go meant maybe we should have a humanitarian intervention. Now, the fact that I was commenting on Fox about a president who changes his opinion every other day ought to be covered by a Fox commentator using all the things I said, not handpicking the ones that fit your premise.
Mr. Speaker, the question was, are you now certain the way forward in Libya?
I have a red light, but if I'm allowed to answer.
You're allowed to.
I talked recently to General Abizaid, who is probably the most knowledgeable senior general and speaks fluent Arabic, who said to me, we have a bigger strategic deficit than our fiscal deficit. I think we need to rethink everything in the region. I think we need to rethink Afghanistan, we need to rethink Iraq, and I think we need to recognize that right now Iran is on offense, and our troops are in danger everywhere in that region, and I think we need a very serious national debate about it.
Speaker Gingrich, you said you would impose a loyalty test for Muslims to serve in your administration. You said, quote, we did this in dealing with the Nazis, and we did this in dealing with the communists. Are you really comparing American Muslims to Nazis, and what specific loyalty test would you require them to take?
Well, actually, I didn't describe it as applied to Muslims. I described it as applied to everybody. We had, after all, a Catholic head of counterespionage for the FBI who turned out to be a Soviet spy. We've had a Cuban-American refugee who turned out to be a major Soviet spy, a major Cuban spy for over 20 years on behalf of Castro. My point was, there is nothing illegitimate about seeking to make sure that people are loyal to the United States if the government of the United States. And I was responding to this insane moment where the New York Times attempted bomber, the guy who built the car bomb from Pakistan, was asked by the judge, who said to him, but you swore an oath of loyalty to the United States. And he said to the judge, I am your enemy. I lied. And the judge seemed mystified at the idea that somebody would have lied. And my point is, we now know, for example, from the Verona papers and others, there really were communist spies. And I would suggest to you we need security provisions across the board to ensure that those Americans in the American government are loyal to the United States.
Speaker Gingrich, you say that the unemployment problem in America has been made worse by the policies of the Federal Reserve. You call for auditing the Fed and stripping it of its banking powers. But Congressman Paul thinks the Fed needs to be abolished to create lasting prosperity. Why is the Fed worth saving?
Well, I think that having some kind of central bank is, in fact, an important part of how you deal with monetary policy in the modern world. But I would say to you that having Chairman Bernanke deal with hundreds of billions of dollars, and some estimates are as much as $16 trillion, in secret, is profoundly against a free society. The Fed should be totally audited. It should be out in public. Their decision documents from 08, 07, and 08, and 09 should be public. We should know who they bailed out and why they bailed them out and who they didn't bail out. And I think that it is a scandal that the Federal Reserve is secret. And I think that, frankly, their monetary policy since the late 90s has been a major factor in the bubble that has been created and a major factor in the economic pain we're now going through. So the Fed is certainly, going back as Reagan did to sound money, is certainly a key part of how you get back to prosperity, and the Fed is the primary villain in failing to have a sound money policy. Well, let me first of all thank Fox and the Washington Examiner, and let me thank the people of Iowa for hosting this tonight. I think in many ways this is a very important next step in the national conversation. But I want to remind everyone that the presidential election is 15 months away. We are in a crisis now. And I would hope everybody watching us around the country would call their congressmen and their senators now and say, go back to Washington, repeal Dodd-Frank, repeal Sarbanes-Oxley, repeal Obamacare. This summer, start saving American families from the pain they're in, because we have real problems and we need real leadership now.